So everything all right? You can see the screen, you can see?
Yes.
Slides. Right, I'll get going then. Okay, so Lisa's going to talk about reviewing, I think, primarily. And so I'm talking primarily about journals, publishing in journals. There's so much to say. So there's also publishing in other formats as well, including books and chapters and so on. But I'll just concentrate on journals. And this is the plan for the talk. Which I'm hoping is the kind of questions that you want answered. And I'll do my best to try and answer them. So how do you choose your journal? What are the stages towards getting published and how long will it take? And how do you improve your chances of getting published? Because we know it's not easy. As Lisa, we've all been there. We've all had the experience of not getting published. And, you know, it's a long road. Okay, so starting off with which journal to choose. That's a tricky one. I suggest that you look at the references in your manuscript. You've already written your manuscript, so you know what kind of things you're referring to in your sources. So have a look and see what journals they come from. If you submit to your manuscript to a journal which you've also referenced, there's no obligation to do this. But it does reassure the editor that you are working in the same area. And it's very helpful to the editor as well, because it gives them ideas for who to ask to review. Because very often editors will ask someone who's been cited in your manuscript to review it. And speaking personally, I very often use that as a kind of incentive to reviewers. I say, oh, could you spare the time to review this manuscript? It cites your work very much, you know, and that gives them an extra reason to want to review it. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily inclined to accept it, because they might be super critical because they know their own work. But it's sort of, at least I can be sure that they will know the topic. So do look at the references in your manuscript, and also try and make sure that they're up to date as well, those references. You know, you don't want to be, if I glance down a manuscript and I see that all the references are from the previous century, I start being a bit, you know, doubtful that they're really up to date with what's been going on in their field. You can check your journal ranking. I don't know how much this matters to you. And journal ranking changes each year, and there are different ways of ranking journals. So it's not an absolute measure. And you really should be choosing a journal which matches the readership you're writing to, rather than the absolute top one in the field, if that's not the same, if they hasn't got the same readership. Because any of the Q1 journals will be, will be regarded as being acceptable to you, to your employers and to other academics. There is this thing, I don't know if you've heard of it, Margo. There are probably other ones as well. Their websites, I think I'll just put this over. Yeah, can you see there's the URL for it. But if you just Google Margo, you'll find it. And you can type in there the name of any journal, and it will come up with details about what its impact scores are. If it's most journals, it will also say, it will lead you to the journal website, and it will tell you what the journal is for and what it focuses on and so on. So if you want an overview of the kind of journals that are out there, it's quite a good place to start. Look at the journal home pages, because that's, on the next slide, I'll show you the home pages for JEEP to give you an idea of what kind of information you can find there. But the journal home pages do provide a lot of information about the focus of the journal and what its likely readership is and what they're looking for. And check the aims and scope. Another thing that you can do is you'll have key terms. You should probably have identified some key terms for your study, and you can go to the journal homepage, go to the search option, type those in and see what else has been written in that journal in your area. That could help you add to your references, and it can also, reassure again the editor that you know the journal and you know the kind of things that have been published there in your fields. So that to me that seems like all obvious advice, but actually it's surprising how few people do it, as we'll show. If you've chosen a journal and the fit isn't good, don't try and adjust your study a great deal to fit that journal. I would say look for another journal, because there might be another good journal out there that fits your aims and your scope better. So don't just be fixated on a particular journal. Be open-minded. You might find a good journal out there that would really welcome your research. Here's the homepage for JEAP, as we call it, Journal of English for Academic Purposes. And you can see there's quite a lot of information there about what it's for and why and so on. There's a guide for authors. Most journals will provide this, very useful. It will talk you through the whole process, and there's aims and scope. So you can really look to see what the journal is looking for. Some journals have a much broader scope than others. Some are, they'll cover articles in a very wide range of topics, and others are narrow. Yeah, so make sure that you know which that is. So, for example, here's the aims and scope for JEAP, and you can see it's English for the purposes of academic study and scholarly exchange. Now, an awful lot of people who submit to JEAP have not read this or have misinterpreted it in some way, because we get all kinds of articles submitted. We get ones about Wuthering Heights, and we get ones about, sort of gender politics in India or something. And then they're really not about the use of English for the purposes of academic study and scholarly exchange. So I can't understand why they sent them to JEAP. My assumption is that in some cases people have sent the same article to a lot of journals at the same time, a sort of scattergun approach, and that is definitely something you must not do, because editors do talk to each other, and reviewers go around the houses as well. So if you're asked to review for one journal, you would know, you might be asked, if someone had submitted the same article to another journal at the same time, you might get it twice, and then you would immediately, alarm bells would ring. I can see that it's very tempting. You're in a hurry, as an author, you're in a hurry, you want to get your article published. So it might seem like a sensible thing to do, to say, oh, I'll send it to all these journals and one of them might pick it up. But you mustn't. It's very bad practice. You'll get sort of, your name will be remembered, and you might get a bad reputation if you do that, because you have to do it one at a time. You have to send it to one journal, get response from them, and then send it to another journal. If at a certain point during the review process you decide you don't want to publish in that journal, you have to formally sort of withdraw from that journal. Otherwise, you get a lot of people working for nothing, a lot of reviewers working for no purpose whatsoever. You notice here, I expect your eyes were drawn immediately to the blue box on the right about desk rejection. Desk rejection is when an article does not go out for review. And actually about 60% of manuscripts to JEAP don't go out to review at all. So that you get a quick response, but that's the end of the road. And the reasons for desk rejection are that the study is out of scope, as I said before, people sending in articles that are not and don't fit the purposes or the readership of the journal. We can't publish them because readers will say, well, this isn't what I subscribed to this journal for. I didn't subscribe to this journal to find out about some other topic in another area. You can also get desk rejected because the manuscript's just not, is not acceptable. And it has quite badly, I mean, we can repair organization. We can tell people to cut down or to lengthen if we think that there is potential in the study, but sometimes it just looks beyond repair and then we'll reject it. Often it will be rejected before it gets to the editor. There is a person who's a kind of publishing assistant who works for the journal. I think most the Elsevier journals have someone like this, probably most journals do, and they weed out the really obviously unsuitable manuscripts before they ever get to the editor. The other reason why you can be rejected before review is because the findings are not sufficiently original or important. And that's a really tricky one because, we don't want to make a sort of immediate judgment on that. Usually, it would have to be very unoriginal to get desk rejected because usually that judgment is left to the reviewers. So in many cases, I get an article and I think it doesn't look as though the findings are very important. But I still send it out to review because maybe the reviewers will see something I didn't see. Here's a reject letter. And they're not, I try to write reject out of scope letters that are specific to the particular submission. However, I just yesterday, having written a reject letter like this, I got an angry letter back from the author saying that it was in scope. I'm not quite sure. I think I would just ignore that because you could go on and on and on arguing about whether or not it's in scope. I was very nice. Usually we offer something called journal search. Is a little link to a journal search, and we say you can have a look and see here are other journals that here's a way of searching for other journals that might suit you better. So we're encouraging when we send out an out of scope message. And here's an invitation to revise before review. This is quite rare, actually. The editor here is being very helpful. I wouldn't rely on getting a message like this. The editor is really trying to help this author by nudging them towards making it more in scope for the journal. But generally speaking, that doesn't happen. Generally speaking, they would, if it's out of scope, it's out of scope, goodbye. I don't know what your reactions are. I can't see your faces. I don't know whether you're nodding enthusiastically or whether you're looking really angry that this should happen. Okay, so the other thing is, does the study make a sufficient contribution to the field in terms of originality and importance? And to get published in a Q1 journal, generally speaking, it has to make a contribution to the field. It's got to have new important findings. It's what we call a takeaway message. And people who run courses on writing for publication, in fact, there's some good books written about writing for publication. They stress this. A couple of years ago, I did a course in Indonesia for early career researchers on writing for publication. And the first day of the course was to get the authors who had their drafts of their manuscripts to write down what their takeaway message was. And they found it incredibly difficult because they just hadn't been thinking in those terms. They weren't thinking, what's the, in a few words, what is the really main message of my article? They hadn't really thought like that. The reviewers and the editor will be looking for that takeaway message, and they'll expect to find it in the highlights. You know what the highlights are, where they're optional, but they're the bits at the beginning of the paper where you say what the main findings are. They'll expect to find it in the abstract and in the introduction and in the conclusion. And it should actually drive your introduction. You should have it in the back of your mind all the way through your introduction, because the introduction, you're working away trying to persuade readers to accept your takeaway message. Unfortunately, the takeaway message is often the last thing that authors think of, and particularly if the article comes out of PhD research. The reason for this is because a PhD thesis has a different purpose from a journal article. So a PhD thesis, you're trying to persuade your examiners that you're a competent researcher, that you know about research methods, that you're well informed about the current literature in the field, that you can write well, those kind of things. And examiners will pass a PhD and be happy with a PhD thesis if it demonstrates all those things. It's competent. You don't have to work very, very hard at persuading a PhD examiner, at least not in the UK. I'll be interested to hear what your take is on this. But from my experience, and I've examined a lot of theses, if they can persuade me that they're a competent researcher and they are able to conduct research independently, I'm not that bothered whether they are saying something massively original, something that's groundbreaking, that's going to change people's understanding of the field. But when you come to write a journal article, it's taken for granted that you know your methodology and that you are up to date in the field. What the game changer is, have you something really, really important to say? So it's a different focus. Obviously, you have to have all the research methods and so on. Time and time again, we get journal articles submitted, or some manuscripts submitted to the journal with wonderful methodology sections where the author has really, really learned how to apply a particular methodology. It's brilliant. But they obviously haven't really been thinking about why they were doing it. It's all the process rather than the outcome. And they get rejected, those papers, because it's the findings that really matter. I mean, obviously the findings have to be backed up by brilliant evidence, but they're the ones that matter. If in the end you haven't got anything interesting to say at the end of all this super analysis, then chances are it will get rejected. Okay, so here are the stages towards publication. If I'll just try, I hope you can see my cursor going through. This is, here you are. You can, good. Here's the starting point. You are the author, you submit your paper. The first question is, have the basic requirements been met? In other words, is it in scope? Is it reasonably well written, organized? Is it long enough or short enough? Is it ready to go out for review? Yes, we assign. The editor assigns the reviewers. Then we struggle to find some reviewers. So eventually reviewers accept. They write their reviews over a period of maybe 30 days. And eventually, sometimes with a bit of reminding, they return their recommendations. Then the editor, again, in the yellow diamond, makes a decision, and they've got three choices. They can reject, they can accept, or they can ask the author to revise. In my experience, they never accept first off. I've never encountered that. It's partly because of the reviewers. The reviewers don't want to show that they have read the article critically. So reviewers are, even if it's an absolutely brilliant article, the reviewers are always going to find some little thing that can be improved because they want to show that they're good reviewers. It just doesn't happen. You don't get an article where not in top journals where the response is, it's marvelous, we're publishing it, and we'll talk about the kind of revisions that you might have to make. So it's going to go through one revision, back submission, back through the process, and then might be accepted second time round, or it might go round again, or again, or again. Yeah. Just to talk about the choosing a reviewing process, you are asked to recommend people who might be good reviewers when you submit your manuscript to a journal, very often. But don't expect the editors to necessarily ask the people who you recommend. Very often people ask for the top name in the field, in which case they are already absolutely overwhelmed with reviewing. They won't have time. It might be someone who's a good reviewer, would be a great reviewer, but they're already, we don't ask people to review another article when they're already reviewing one for the same journal. So we can't ask them because they're already busy with another article, if you see what I mean. So, and there's another reason as well, which I'll come to in a moment, why we don't necessarily pick the reviewer that you have recommended. So we'll go around and we'll use as editors, we'll use our knowledge of the field and a lot of Googling, I have to say, to find someone who's published on a similar topic in a same or a similar journal. So for example, with JEEP, I might have a look at an ESP journal, which publishes a lot of articles that are rather similar to the ones that are in JEEP. And we'll look down the references. If someone jumps out at me from the references and I think, oh, they're a good reviewer, I'll ask them. People on the editorial board get asked a lot to review. And if we know someone who's just completed a PhD, we might give them a chance to review, even if they've never reviewed before. We've got to keep on bringing in new reviewers. So we'll give people a trial reviewing, even if it's first time out. On an aside here, you might ask, well, how come I'm an editor? How come I got to be an editor? And the answer to that is that I was on the editorial board from JEEP right from the very start. But when they asked me to become the editor, I said, why did you choose me? And they showed me, the list of all the reviewers. And I had actually reviewed far and away more than any other person on the board. I'd reviewed hundreds of manuscripts for JEEP, and I'd never thought that they would ask me to become the editor. But on the basis of having reviewed so many manuscripts, they said, well, you know the fields. So I think often reviewers accept a review and they don't realise that. Eventually that might lead to them becoming editor if they want to be, of course. Also, you've got to be a reviewer, you've got to have a web presence. We won't invite a reviewer if we can't see that they're bona fide academics. So if you're a great reviewer, but you haven't got any kind of web presence and any indication that you're affiliated to an institution, you won't get asked, because you could be anybody, really. We don't ask for reviewers who are in any way affiliated to the author. And in fact, we ask reviewers to reject the invitation to review if they if there is any conflict of interest. So they have an obligation not to review if they know the author, if they can recognize who the author is, or, they're related to them in some way. And we try not to select reviewers even from the same region, if we can help it. Obviously, some regions are very large, so that might not be possible. That goes back to who you recommend to be your reviewers when you submit your article. A lot of people recommend somebody in their own department to review. They won't get asked. If it's in the same department, they won't get asked. They might not even get asked if in the same country, because there's too great a possibility for conflict of interest. It's got to be anonymous. It's got to be impartial reviewing. So we're very lucky in our fields. In applied linguistics generally, people are incredibly kind and generous of their time. I don't think that is true in some fields, actually. I think they're much ruder in other fields and much brisker and only write a line or two. But our reviewers write really long reports, really long, helpful reports. Most of them have got a background in teaching, and they've got that desire to teach and to help. So that they're wonderful. The reviews that we get back are absolutely wonderful. They provide loads of advice, and they are, they're not dismissive of, they really want to help the authors. You may get your manuscript sent back for revision several times. So it'll go round and round that chart I showed you, 3-4 times, quite normal. And at the very end, of course, eventually it has to stop going out to review. When the reviewers have only got tiny suggestions for change, then the editor takes over. And I, as an editor, read through any article at that stage very carefully and make a few final minor suggestions before it gets published. So thank you to the reviewers. If any of you are reviewers, thank you very much. They don't get paid. They put in loads of time. They're impartial. The only time they're likely to know who's written the manuscript if it's someone who's very, very famous. Otherwise, and they can guess. But otherwise, they don't know, and they're not interested. They evaluate on the, entirely on the merits of that manuscript. We don't like it if reviewers disagree, obviously, because it places a bigger burden on the editor. But we can bring in a third reviewer, or we can exercise our own judgment, or we can go with one reviewer because they're more experienced than the other reviewer. These things are resolved. So once it's been out for review, there are 3 possibilities. It can be accepted, it can have minor revisions, it can have major revisions, or it can be rejected. And I'm sorry to say that about 30% of JEEP submissions are rejected after the first or second revision. So it is not true that once it's gone out to review and you've revised it, you're guaranteed acceptance. It's still got some way to go. If you get that far and you get responses from the reviewer asking you to revise, then you have to respond to them. And that the advice usually is, don't respond straight away, because almost certainly when you get the reviewer's comments, you're going to pace around the room, huffing and puffing and saying, the reviewers didn't understand, the reviewers have missed, I made that point that they say I didn't make, they haven't understood what I'm trying to do. And don't respond then, wait, give it time, recognize that they are trying to help. Recognize too that you don't have to agree with all their suggestions. They are, they're just giving their opinion. What you have to do is engage. you have to engage with what they are suggesting. You've got to give it due consideration. It's the same as if you were in a Viva. I give that advice to PhD students before they go to a Viva. You know, even if you disagree with an idea put forward by the examiner, you have to say, oh, yes, that's an interesting point. You can't just say, no, I'm not doing that. Give a detailed response. Here's some advice from elsewhere about how to prepare a detailed response letter. You have to, each reviewer comment you've got to consider, and you've got to give a detailed response. Sometimes we get response letters back from authors where they just say, done, 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 done. And that's not enough for the reviewer. The reviewer has to see where it's done, how it's done, and if it hasn't been done, why it hasn't been done. Yeah? Because that response is going straight on to the reviewer, and you don't want to alienate reviewers. You know, if you want to get published in that journal, you've got to get the reviewers on side. And as Lisa said before she was cruelly cut off, everybody gets rejected. I've been rejected. Lisa's been rejected. We've all been rejected. It's fine. Don't be upset. It could be that the editors and the reviewers have made a mistake. It could be that it's a brilliant article and they've just made an error of judgment. Don't challenge their rejection. There's no point. There's no point in writing back to them and saying that they should have accepted it when they didn't. Just take their comments into account. They're bound to have said something useful. Revise, resubmit elsewhere. And, you know, you'll get it published if it's, you know, if you've got something interesting to say, it will get published. Don't take it personally. They won't remember. The editors and reviewers, the reviewers don't know who you are anyway. The editor knows who you are, but won't remember that you've been rejected and won't care anyway. That each new manuscript is a new manuscript. And so it's not damaging your reputation in any way at all. Is a rejection letter. And here I mentioned before, ways in which we might helpfully, this is a kind rejection letter. They're not all, sometimes they're not as long as this. This one is suggesting that they convert their article into something which we have in JEEP called researching EAP practice, which are shorter articles with a less of a literature review. You might want to consider doing that anyway for submission, because they're not as, they're more practice-based. Okay, so what you'll want to know, I'm going to stop in a minute, is speeds of for publication. I get a lot of emails from authors who haven't submitted their article yet saying, if I submit my article, how quickly can I get it published? And you can see that they're under a lot of, some of them are, you know, they're going to lose their jobs if they don't get something published fast, and you'd really sympathize. But it does take almost a year on average to get through. There's a noise.
Yasmin, can you please turn off your microphone? Yasmin Mziu. Thank you.
These are the stats updated up to September 2021. Sorry, I haven't got the most recent stats here, but you can see we pride ourselves on a good turnaround time for first decision. This is after desk rejection. So which around 7-8 weeks, I don't know, a bit longer this year, on average, between submitting and getting your first revision, a decision. That means it's gone out to reviewers, the reviewers have reviewed it, they've sent it back, and then the editor has made a decision. Bear in mind, it takes longer than you might expect, because sometimes the editor chooses two nice reviewers and they don't accept the invitation. They're too busy. Something's happened. So then the editor has to go back and find other reviewers. Sometimes the editor might struggle for quite a long time to find a suitable reviewer because they've asked 3 or 4 people and they've all not accepted the invitation to review. So that can hold things up. And then another thing that can be held up is that the reviewer might not send the review back on time. You know, something might have happened. It's all very understandable. You know, people are ill and some unexpected thing happens. And so although they are only given 30 days to review, it takes longer than 4 weeks because of all these extra things that go on around the reviewing process. So between, 7 and 10 weeks is normal to get your first decision. Then the blue is submission to acceptance. So that is all the time for further reviewing, going around, sending it out again to review, adjusting it, and so on. So that will take between 26 and 30 weeks, shall we say, from submission to acceptance. After that, it's very quick with our journal to going online. So the uncorrected proofs go online almost immediately. Almost as soon as it's accepted with Jeep, it goes online. That's not the case with all journals. Some journals hold their accepted articles back and put them all out together in an issue. But Jeep and quite a lot of the other Elsevier journals are on it's a rolling thing. So you as soon as, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, as soon as it's been accepted, within a matter of a week, it goes online. The thing is that is the uncorrected proofs. So it won't look very good. There'll be funny things because the pages haven't been properly, laid out and everything. So some authors complain and say it doesn't look nice, and some authors are delighted because it's out there, fast. So, the idea is to try to get it as perfect as possible before it's accepted, so that what goes up on the screen after acceptance, before it's been properly proofread and laid out, still looks okay. This one here is when the version is properly proofread, and then there's a bit of a lapse of time between that and actually getting it with all the page numbers and the issue numbers and everything like that. But if you want to cite it, if you want to draw people's attention to it, you can be, you don't have to wait for that. You can use the URL and the DOI is given out then. Okay. Costs, actually, that's something to look out for. There is such a thing you've probably heard of, gold open access. That's quite expensive. Not many people choose it. If you get selected, if you're a prize winner, every year now we're offering a prize for the best articles, and the best 3 articles get open access for 6 months. So you can get open access without paying if you're lucky, but most people don't opt for subscription because their institutions give subscription. You can, of course, put it on, you can put an unformatted version on something like ResearchGate, so you can get it out there. And you get, once it's been accepted for publication, you get a link which lasts a month or 2, which you can send out to your friends and colleagues, where they can access the article for free. So we don't charge, and this leads me to my last point with the old predatory journals, because they're the ones that are trying to make money out of you and exploit you. knowing that people are desperate to publish, they will contact you, ask you if you want to publish, promise a lot, and then when you accept and you send your manuscript, they'll say, right, now give me £5,000 or whatever, dollars or whatever it is. So do look out for these predatory journals. If someone invites you to submit a manuscript, it may well be one of these journals. If they've got a very vague journal title, it's not really clear what their scope is. And if they promise a very fast turnaround, we've seen that proper reviewing takes time. If they're going to, they can't do proper peer review within a matter of a week or two. It's not possible. So that means that they're not peer reviewed in any meaningful way. And if they haven't got visibility, there's no point in publishing an article in a journal which no one can see and no one hears about. I sometimes read, I'm asked to evaluate promotion applications around the world. And sometimes, sadly, people send in their CVs and they've got like 100 publications and they're almost all in predatory journals. And I have to say that doesn't count, in my opinion. That is not, it's not worth it, because that is no guarantee of any kind of expertise. You know, so you've got the publications, but I can't look at them, I can't find them online, so I can't check. You know, there's no point. Also, if you get unexpected publishing costs, that's something, you know, suspicious. Just to show you, last week I got two unsolicited invitations to pub. I don't know if you were getting the same sort of thing. Here's the you can see how suspicious it is. We publish academic articles into major humanities, social science, education, and other such relevant topics we accept. Original research, reviews, short report. They don't know what my field is. These messages are sent out to anybody, anywhere. Thousands of these messages go out by, you know, automatically. We accept articles in all languages. That sounds very suspicious to me. How can they peer review in all languages? Here's another one. And it's so badly written. I know it's not a good journal. Even the fact that you can see up at the top, the heading was Material Science and Engineering. And then underneath it says American Journal of Biomedical Science. They have fancy names, these predatory journals, but they beware, beware. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Nesi, for this wonderful presentation.
Hold on, I said stop. I'm trying now to get out of this thing.
Yeah, you stopped sharing your screen, so
I got end show. Yes, I'm back in. Yeah.
Okay, now we open. We give the floor to all the participants to ask any questions. Okay, now I can see hands up. Okay, so I guess there's going to be plenty of questions. Let's start with Professor Bakluti, if you don't mind. We're going to take like 2-3 questions and give you the floor to answer them. Otherwise, we won't have enough time to go through all the questions. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Nesi. In fact, these are just comments more than questions. Thank you for this because, I mean, thank you for drawing the attention of our researchers to these predatory journals, because I myself work in national recruitment committees and I'm sometimes asked to evaluate promotion files internationally. And unfortunately, we do find these predatory journals. The problem, I think, is that with our researchers not being patient enough to undergo the process of evaluation and peer review. I had a colleague of mine last week saying they put so much time in the review. She submitted an article, and Hajar, could you please mute your microphone? she submitted an article, and it took so much time for the review, and that made her impatient, because people need to submit their promotion files. So I think the thing is to find this balance between good quality and, again, not being so much lacking behind deadlines. This is, I think, what we need to work on. And I think a tip in this is that when you submit an article, you can still work on another research work. So, I mean, you should not, I mean, put all your eggs in one bag. This is, if I can borrow the metaphor. So you can submit an article and still carry on your research on other issues, on other topics, pending patiently for the decision of the editorial board. Now, one more comment about SCImago. Our university is a University of Sfax. Has obtained, I think, or has got a very good ranking at SCImago in scientific disciplines, in computer science. It's just that we are struggling in humanities, as I think it's the case all over the world. And in humanities, it's a little bit more difficult to find our way. So, but we are aware of all these databases, and we are working on that of Scopus, Web of Science. I mean, we do have good rankings in all of these internationally and regionally.
Yeah, the SCImago has two things. It's got institutional rankings and it's got journal rankings. So I was advising on the journal rankings, not the institutional rankings.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Makhlouti, thank you. Give the floor to Maha Unis. I think she's got a question. Please, Maha.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Nesi, for this interesting presentation. I would also welcome my teachers, Mrs. Aqila, Mr. Munir, and Mrs. Nadia. Thank you. So here my question is, what about pilot studies? I have conducted some pilot studies, but some of them were rejected just because of the limited number of participants. Yeah. But as you know, a pilot study is not meant to tackle a big number of participants. So my question, are there journals specific to applied linguistics pilot studies here?
First of all, I have to say that probably your understanding of pilot study is different from mine, because for me, a pilot study is not about getting findings. A pilot study is to check that your methodology works and that the research design works. And therefore, it's not suitable for a pilot study, to my mind, is not suitable for publication. It's just, you conduct a pilot study. It doesn't matter how many, it's not a question of how many participants you have. It's a question of what it's for. And a pilot study is not in order to arrive at findings. A pilot study is just there to check that you are working along the right lines. You've got the right methods of recruiting and right kind of data gathering instruments and the right methods of analysis. Yeah. So maybe what you're describing is not a pilot study. Maybe it's a study where you have genuine findings, and it's just that you've got only a small number of participants, in which case, yeah, I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't be published, as long as those findings, as long as you've gone in depth into the data and managed to pull out really interesting findings. There's no reason why it shouldn't be published anywhere. We do not evaluate an article on the basis of the number of participants. We evaluate it on the basis of how convincing the findings are and how important the findings are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nesi. Any more questions, please? Otherwise, I do have one. Okay, so give myself.
Good morning, everyone. Shall I?
Okay, hi, Irene. Yes, go ahead.
I'm supervised by Mr. Professor, Munir Triki. I'm doing my master degree with him. So it's a pleasure to be among you today. Thank you for giving me the floor to ask a question. Honestly, I would like to ask Professor Hilary Nesi about her piece of advice for the beginning of writing a research article, because I'm still new in this field. So I don't know how to start. Maybe what are your basic guidelines so that we will be accepted? Like what should we focus on at the beginning of writing?
That's a big
Well,
question, Vim.
I mean, how far back are we going in the process? I mean, have you got a topic?
Yes, I have a topic. I'm just doing my master degree, and at the same time, I'm just thinking about writing a research paper. It came out from my classroom observation. I've been doing classroom observation, and then I just came out of an idea of writing a small research paper. That's it.
Yeah. I mean,
you.
I'm sure everybody here will have different advice on this. I'm sure everyone will have a different take. So personally, I think, but others might disagree, problematize, you know, whatever your topic is, you've got to my mind, you've got to problematize it so that,
Okay.
because you've got to convince people that it's worth doing. You know, often at master's degree, what you are doing is you are going through the process of conducting research to practice.
Yes.
So in order to convert that into something that's a publication standard, you've got to add an extra layer of, you know, but why are you doing this? Is the takeaway message, really. So have a good think about why this is important. What problem is it addressing? And start from there. Start from there, because in your introduction is mostly about explaining that problem and why you're addressing it, and why you're addressing it, and why other people, why you're not satisfied with the work that's already been done.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we could go on forever. We could talk. I mean, this is something that would be a long process of interaction to discuss how it would go on. But a short answer is that for me. But I'm sure everyone else has got a different advice to give on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
There was Marwa who I saw her hand.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm currently studying for a PhD, so this is really interesting and I mean topic for me. And thanks so much for the tips that you gave in your presentation. Well, I have a question actually, and it's because I submitted an article and it was accepted. Now it's published, but I got a comment raising the issue that my writing style, it appears that I'm not a native speaker. So they raised that issue, even though they accepted it. But I had that in my mind when every time I publish or I write manuscript, I try hard to make my writing style really like native speakers, but it's not possible because I'm not a native speaker. So I always have that kind of that it pops up that I'm not a native speaker. It's not really a question, but
no, it's a very,
we get the point, Mara.
Valid
Thank
point.
you.
We're not actually allowed to say, you know, or we deeply discourage saying native speaker. I'm sure Lise will agree with me on that. I mean, I think BAL, the British Association of Applied Linguistics, doesn't allow you to use the term native speaker because it's not very meaningful. And in actual fact, I can assure you there are many native speakers who, in other words, people whose mother tongue is English, who write appallingly. And it's much more a question of experience. I mean, academic writing is not something that people whose mother tongue is English learn at home or at school. It's something that they learn over the years through writing research. And it doesn't matter whether it's your first small kind of grammatical errors, surface level errors should not affect your chances of publication, because those are very easily dealt with, those surface levels. What the problem arises with organization, with expressing complex ideas, and that is a matter of experience, you know, years and years and years of training. And if you've got so-called native speaker undergraduate and asked them to write something approaching a research article in English, they would be they'd be rubbish at it. They would, you know, it'd be full of, the language would not be appropriate, not because because English wasn't their first language, it was because they hadn't had sufficient experience of writing in this academic style. It's a trick that you learn through, you know, terms of phrase, you know, that are not used by ordinary people in the street, no matter whether their first language is English or not. They're used by academics.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Okay, thank you, Marwa. So we give the floor to more participants. Liz, we're really sorry to keep you waiting. So is it okay for you? Like 5 more minutes, no more, right? So Faiza, please. Rosette de Bell, your microphone is muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Nasreen. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. I just wanted to add a comment, kind of a tip for Marwa. What I do with my students before high stakes exams and before publishing or thinking about publishing is that I advise them to do some kind of genre analysis of 5 articles and to look for, again, what you mentioned as the tricks, So they need to spot the genre moves, which will make perhaps their already good article, but which does not conform to the moves and rhetorical moves of journal writing. And I think that's also one way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Familiarizing yourself with the genre. Yeah, takes time.
I do have a question, if you don't mind, everybody. Okay, that targets your job as an editor. I had a paper rejected from the editors. It took like ages. It took them more than 2 months, and after that they said, well, it didn't fit the scope, or the message was not that clear. So there was an issue with the scope, and there was it seemed like there were other issues. However, is it possible, for example, to write back to the editor asking for more clarifications? Because you know, I trusted my abilities.
I'm very, very sorry, Nasreen. I mean, that shouldn't happen. Okay. It shouldn't happen. It took too long to be rejected without going out to review. Yeah, that's too long. Too long. I don't know whether it was G. Was it G?
No.
Oh,
no. It's a completely different field.
There are, you know, all kinds of things can happen. I mean, we had one of our associate editors. Her husband was in a horrible accident, and you know, I mean, these things happen. So, I mean, there could be genuine reasons why it took so long. How you can write back for clarification, but quite frankly, I don't think it's worth it.
No, it's just because I wanted to learn from, like, I didn't want to make the same mistake again.
Yeah, but if it's out of scope, it will be out of scope for that particular journal.
Okay. It's
so
not only about
it won't be out of scope for another journal, you know, so I wouldn't bother, quite frankly. I mean, if they take so long to reply first time round, they might take another 2 or 3 months to reply this time round. And they might, I just wouldn't bother. There are other reasons why things are rejected, which I haven't gone into, but sometimes journals decide that they are not publishing any more articles for the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And
they're receiving a lot of submissions, whereas they can only publish.
Too many submissions. They want to keep the numbers they publish down, so it might not even be because of the quality, anything to do with the quality of your article. Okay. So just forget it and go somewhere else.
Okay, thank you.
That's what my advice would be.
Thank you. One last question from Lobna, and that's it. We move to Liz's presentation. Thank you. Lobna?
Yes, hello everyone.
Hi.
Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. Actually, I have a couple of questions. The first one deals with, which I call personally, problem of indexation or impact factor.
Thought someone was going to ask about that. I've got a whole load of slides on it, but I thought it's too much.
Actually, my question is the following. Does this mean that journals which are not impacted are not worth? I mean, we should not, as researchers or PhD students, consider these articles? So this is the first question. The second question is, there's also this issue of journals which you need to pay to get published. So is this, in between inverted commas, ethically acceptable that because you can pay, so your article might be published? If you can't, your article can't be published just because problem of money.
Okay.
So, thank you, Lubna.
Okay. There's a lot to answer there. First of all, being asked to pay is not an indication of whether a journal is a good journal or not. Some journals are open access and free for everybody, and some charge for payment, and some run on a subscription model, but you can have open access. That basically, it costs money to run a journal, essentially. That money's got to come from somewhere. Now, some institutions have good journals because the institution pays for all the editing costs and everything like that, but it is expensive, and you can't expect that to happen very much. So two alternative models are subscription. So that means that the reader has to pay, or the author has to pay. It's not that they're trying necessarily. I admit that Elsevier makes quite a lot of money out of journals, but we won't go there. It's not. The money has to come from somewhere, essentially. So it's not an indicator of the quality of the journal. The problem is with the predatory journals, where they take your money and they don't give you anything in return, essentially. They don't give you visibility. They don't give you good reviews. They don't give you any guarantee of the quality of your paper. Yeah. So in our field, at the moment, most journals run on a subscription basis. A lot of countries will say that's not, they might offer cheaper subscription to developing countries. But even so, around the world, there are a lot of places where institutions can't afford to pay the subscription, so people can't read those papers, and that's a great shame. The alternative model is for the author to pay, and then everyone read the paper. But as you rightly say, the poor old author's got to cough up. Sometimes institutions will pay for you to publish. And if you have funding, if you're applying for funding, then you can cost in the cost of publication into your funding application. But in our field, where there's not a lot of funding available, it is problematic, I agree. But it doesn't mean that people are being unfair if they ask for money. It's just that the money's got to come from somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for all the answers, Professor Nesi. I apologize for all the others who still have more questions.